Folks, I'm doing this update video right before Monday, April 27, where the SBA is going to crank up in the SBA engine again and start approving more Paycheck Protection Program loans based on the round two of funding of the new bill that was signed into law Friday, April 24th. So in this video, we're going to cover a couple of new pieces of information that you can see on the Treasury website. I'll put the link in the description. One is going to be a new document called How to Calculate Loan Amounts. That's going to be pretty interesting. We're going to cover that. We're also going to talk about the SBA Paycheck Protection Program loan report and talk about the industries that have been funded so far. I'm also going to talk about an update to the frequently asked questions document. There's a really interesting question and answer there that's worth looking at. And in the interim final rule, there's some updates to the regulations on how the PPP is going to be implemented and who is eligible and who's supposed to return the money if they were not eligible in the first place. But before doing all that, I want to show you my spreadsheet. I put together a spreadsheet on my own because I'm a super nerd and I've been wanting to figure out kind of like where's this money going? Who is it affecting? What percentage of the workforce is being affected? So I made my own calculations based on multiple sources. So I went to the Department of Labor website and I downloaded the latest statistics sheet. It's basically a summary sheet. It was updated April 15th to tell you how many people are working based on the Department of Labor and what the average salaries is. So I'll put a link to that document in the description below. So I took the information from there to figure out what is the annual median gross income. Let's assume that's the average. We're going to take the median as the average. No time to discuss the differences between average and median, but we're going to make the assumption that what's in that document, which is $957 per week, the weekly median income, multiply that times 52, and that's going to be the annual. I'm dividing that by 12 to figure out what's the monthly equivalent of that median income. Then I multiply that times 2.5, which is the PPP program standard, to figuring out how much of a loan size to get. And I added about 8.5% of burden. So basically what that means is I went back to all my clients that applied for Paycheck Protection Program, and I took a look at the difference between the gross payroll amount and the additional amounts that they were adding, such as the state and local taxes, health insurance, and retirement benefits that the company was being paid. And in average, in my own portfolio of clients was about 8.5. So I'm applying the same 8.5, making the assumption that the nationwide average is about that. So that gives us around $11,000 per employee. The PPP protection program is going to fund, in average, $11,000 per employee, right? I mean, some employees get paid more, some get paid less, some get paid more than $100,000, and it's capped at $100,000 anyway. So there's technically sort of a cap around $22,000 or $21,000 per employee. So that gives you an idea more or less of how much money per employee small businesses are getting through the PPP program. Now, if you take the first round of funding, which is $350 billion, I'm going to go ahead and remove the second round of funding, and you take the $350 billion and you take away 3%. I'm assuming banks are taking about 3% between the interest that the SBA is subsidizing and the actual fee that the bank is making, which is anywhere between 1% and 5%, depending on the loan size. I'm just rough estimating that that's 3%. We have total amounts of money available to lend, $338 billion. So if you take that number and you divide it, you take the total amount per employee, the average amount per employee that I calculated on my own, and I divide it by the total PPP funding amount, I get roughly 30 million people. And
let me just say on this PPP program, it was 3 weeks ago that the president signed the law. We had the program up and running in a week, which was unprecedented. It's impacted now over 30 million Americans.
So I guess that's what he meant. He meant 30 million people were subsidized through the PPP Paycheck Protection Program. So you take those 30 million people divided by the total labor force, which is about 115,900,000. This also comes from that labor of statistics document, so I'm not making that up. That gives you roughly about 26%. So if the CARES Act would have been the only funding they did for the Paycheck Protection Program, about 26% of the entire American workforce would have been subsidized through the PPP program. Now, statistics say that roughly half of the employees work for small businesses, and small businesses are the ones that are eligible for the PPP program. So this will give us funding to fund roughly half of the business of the employees of the country, which is that 25% that you're seeing there. So now the new bill adds an additional 310 billion. So that's 000 right? Enter, correct? So the new bill adds $310 billion to the total PPP funding, which gives us a grand total of $659 billion, which gives the banks roughly $19 billion. So, banks enjoy it, don't spend it all in one place. And it gives us a net of $639 billion for the people. And then we can divide that by that same $11,000 per employee I calculated. So that gives me roughly 9% of the labor force, which is roughly all of the labor force in the small business category. So I know there might be tons of flaws with this rough calculation. Hey, I'm not an economist and I don't have that much data. So I think that given the circumstances, the calculation is pretty good.
Some analysts and experts tell CNN that ultimately the Paycheck Protection Program might need upwards of $1 trillion. What do you think?
I don't think that's the case. And, we're incredibly pleased with the participation rate. We think that another $300 billion, that's what we're talking about, should be sufficient to reach almost everybody.
But the reason why I'm doing this, I wanted to have an idea more or less what the purpose of the Paycheck Protection Program was or is. And it's clear to me with the second amendment of the Paycheck Protection Program that the government wanted to subsidize 100% of employee salaries for 2 months during the COVID-19 crisis. So now that you see the numbers and you see the spreadsheet, now you can clearly tell that that is the intent in the first place. Now, it would have been nice if the government would have said that from the beginning to say, our goal is to subsidize 100% of small businesses' payroll for 2 months. And if that was the true intent, why even bother with all these crazy calculations and all these crazy programs? All you really had to do is figure out who has employees and then direct deposit into their bank account, because businesses are registered with IRS to make payroll deposits, payroll check deposits. So the IRS technically has a way of collecting money from businesses. So they could also, I guess, send us money back. And the IRS already knows who's on payroll because we submitted W-2s last year. So we could have saved, a lot of time and energy just by having the IRS, refund the businesses for running payroll, which they already have that information in the first place. And we could have saved $19 billion that are going to the banks for literally no freaking reason at all. So I think what would have made sense is to have a plan in place to what's the purpose of the PPP is to fund payroll for every small business in America, for half of the workforce. Why didn't they just do that? Why didn't they just direct deposit into the businesses that had employees already? Why? Why did they go through all this crazy process with calculations and accountants involved and sending documents? I mean, it's just completely insane. Now, I know there's some flaws to my logic here too, because some non-employers are also included in the calculations, self-employed people, partnerships. In some cases, you have a mixture between the owner of the business who's self-employed and the employees. I know those are special cases. Maybe they could have done where 80% of the cases they do direct funding to the W-2 employees already in the system, and then maybe leave a little bit of money for these extra cases so the banks can underwrite it separately. But long story short, obviously I know hindsight is 2020, and it would have been very difficult back then to know all the messes that they got into by having this mucked up program. But this will give you an idea more or less why government intervention is bad in the first place. Why when government gets their hands on our money and they're going to spend our money based on probably good intentions, they just complicate things and make things worse. So I don't know what the solution would have been. I don't know if there was a free market solution for it, but this just proves to you that it didn't need to be this messy in the first place. So let's go through the updates. Okay, so that was my editorial portion. Let's go through the updates, and let's start with how to calculate loan amount. So let's open up that document that's over here, And this is going to be a review for the folks that have already seen my videos on calculating the loan amounts, but let's see if there's any new information here. So let's start with the first one. I'm a self-employed with no employees. How do I calculate my loan amount? So step one, you got to find your 2019 IRS Form 1040, Schedule C. You're going to look at line 31, which is your net income and your net profit. It says here, if you don't have one filed yet, fill one out. It's not saying fill it and file it. It's saying fill it, right? The banks are going to require you to give them a Schedule C form. If you don't have one, fill one out. If you don't know how to fill one out, Google it, search the instructions, look for a video on YouTube, figure out how to do it. If you don't have the time to do it, but you have the money, hire a professional, have somebody do it for you. So all you have to do is fill one out and give it to the bank. And the dollar amount will be based on that line 31 from Schedule C. Now, there is going to be a limit of 100,000. So you have to have at least zero. It says right here, have to have at least zero or more, right? You have to have some sort of positive. Actually, you need to have at least $1 or more, right, of net income for this to work. If it's zero or negative, if you lost money, then you don't get any access to PPP money. So you have to have positive net income of more than $0, as it says here, and it cannot be more than 100,000. So your net income between 0 and 100,000 will be the number that they use. Then you take divide that by 12 to get your average monthly, multiply it times 2.5, and that's your PPP loan amount. Now, if you already received any sort of EIDL money, so if you got that $1,000 all the way to $10,000 that SBA advanced directly from the Treasury to people's bank account, if you got that, you need to add that in the loan because you are going to have sort of a consolidated loan, PPP and EIDL registered, right? So the SBA, that way they're going to register that you got two loans. It says here, your 2019 IRS Form Schedule C must be provided to substantiate the applied for loan amount. You must provide the 2019 IRS Form 1099 miscellaneous detailing non-employee compensation, invoices, bank statements, book of record, establishing you were self-employed in 2019, and the 2020 invoice, bank statement, book of record that you operated from February 2015. Now, I've done a couple of applications where they haven't really asked me for any 1099 invoices, bank statements, or book of records, which basically means accounting. But what this is saying is if the bank wants to ask you for that stuff, they might ask you for that stuff, and you better have it, right? So you're going to need it for, at least for the forgiveness portion, you might need to prove it. So even if you don't get asked for that upfront, when you apply for the money, you might really require it on the forgiveness portion. Okay, let's go to the next one here. I'm a self-employed with employees. How do I calculate my maximum PPP loan amount? So this is going to be a combination of calculation. So step one, you do what we just talked about, okay? And you figure out what is the self-employed portion of the loan amount. So that's going to be whatever your line C, Schedule C, line 31 net income is divided by 12 multiplied times 2.5, plus we're going to take the total wages of your employees, the gross amounts, and he tells you exactly here what you need. You need to find 4 941 forms for each quarter, and you're going to add up line 5C. You're gonna add up line 5C for all 4 quarters, and that gives you the gross amount. If any specific employees get paid more than $100,000, you're gonna limit that to $100,000 per employee, plus any contributions to healthcare for individuals are going to be included. So that's going to be on Schedule C, line 14. However, the individual owner's health insurance needs to be excluded. 2019 employer contributions, that's going to be on Schedule C, line 19. So that's any retirement benefits, pension benefits that the business itself paid for their employees. And then the last one would be the employer, state, and local taxes, which doesn't tell you specifically where in the tax form that would be because there isn't a box specific for that. So you would have to know where to find that out. So then you add up the two amounts, you add them up, and then you do the same thing with adding the EIDL money. Now here it says that you are going to have to show the 941 forms, the Schedule C, the state returns, payroll statements, that sort of thing to prove your 2019 payroll. And you might also need to prove that you had payroll all the way up to February 15th. Remember, February 15th, 2020 is the magic number in which your business had to have been active and you have to have had employees. With the exception of self-employed, you just have to have had an active business in February 15th, 2020. Now, one thing, nowhere here in these instructions, it says that if you were not in business in 2019 and you were only in business in 2020, that you qualify. Although the only requirement is that you were in business by February 15th. The problem is we have a huge gap here where the intent of the law and the funding is for any business that was active on February 15th. None of the instructions tell the banks how to manage a PPP loan application where there's an absence of 2019 information. So the only thing you have is 2020 information because your business started anywhere between January 1st and February 15th. You're not going to have a Schedule C. If you don't have a business bank account, if you don't have financial statements, if you don't have a way to prove that you had income between January 1st and February 15th, if your business just started this year, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get a loan. And I would add that even if you had ways to prove it, it will still be very difficult for you to get the loan because banks are going to prioritize the easy loans first, the ones that they can read the instructions and say this fits into this box. We're going to go ahead and process those. And my prediction here is that even if you're eligible, money will run out by the time that banks actually take a human being and manually approve an application because it doesn't fall into the general guidelines. So if you have a business that just started in 2020 and you don't have any of this and you want any possible chance of getting PPP money, you're probably going to have to walk into a community bank, set up an appointment, whatever, and talk to the physical human being that's going to take your application and underwrite the deal. If you don't have the capacity to have that, I got to tell you, it's probably very, very little chance that you'll be able to have any money. I'm sorry, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what I think is going to happen. All right, let's go to the third option here. It says, I'm a self-employed individual who reports income on a Form 1040 Schedule F. Right? This is not a Schedule C. So what documentation should I provide in place of a Schedule C? So Schedule F is farming business, right? So self-employed farming business, it tells you right here what you need. You need to get the information from Form 1040, Schedule 1, and Schedule F. You should use the Schedule F instead of Schedule C, and you're going to pick line 34 from the Schedule F to figure out that number. And then you're going to follow the same numbers, right? You take that line 34, the net farm profits, divided by 12, multiply it times 2.5. If you are a employer farming business, then you follow the same sequence of rules. You add up the employee part and the farming part put together. So good news, there was some rumors that farmers or Schedule F filers were not included in this, and they finally have an actual document from Treasury that says, yeah, they absolutely are. So the next one, how do partnerships apply for PPP loans? Now, an LLC that has more than one member that did not elect to file as an S Corp or a C Corp, that would be a partnership by default. So how do we figure out that maximum loan amount? Should partners' self-employment income be included on the business entity of the PPP loan or on separate loan applications for each partner? Okay, so basically what this says is if you have a partnership with two or more partners, because every partnership will have two or more partners, not an S Corp, not a C Corp, not a self-employed, a partnership that files a Form 1065. Then it's saying, does each partner get to apply for a PPP loan, or does the partnership itself applies for a PPP loan? So the answer is the partnership applies for the PPP loan. Okay, so how do we do it? We're going to take the 2019 Schedule C form. This is one of additional forms that get created when you apply, when you prepare a Form 1065. And most average Americans don't prepare their own partnership returns. I would say I've almost never seen a self-prepared partnership return. There's always an accountant involved. So if you have an accountant, just ask him, hey, can I get the K1s, right? Because the K1s are going to contain all the information. So we're going to take the net earnings from self-employment of the individual based on the U.S. General partners that are subject to self-employment tax. Long story short, we're going to go to box 14A of the K1. Let's just pull that up real quick. So a nice thing about IRS forms, you can Google them and you can find them super quick. So here's what this Schedule K1 looks like. And you're going to look for 14 right here, 14A. So whatever this number says, if this number says 150,000, then for that partner, it would be capped at 100,000. If this says, let's say 0, then that partner is not eligible for calculating payroll costs for the partnership. Now, one thing that's really important somewhere here, it will tell you, like, it will ask you for the type of partner that you have. Only general partners and LLC managers are eligible. Limited partners and foreign partners and domestic partners, none of these are subject to self-employed taxes generally. So if you see that checkbox on any other boxes except for general partner or LLC, it's very unlikely that you will see any dollar amounts inside of that box 14. All right, let's move on. If you have employees, then you follow the same process and you get your 941 forms and you get the information for the 941 forms. There's also a limit of 100,000 per employees, and you can add the employer contributions to health insurance for employees. The partner's health insurance is not included, and then you can do the employer contributions to retirement plans, and the partner's contribution to retirement plans are not included. So then you add up all the numbers, including the state unemployment insurance tax, which will only be for the employees, not the partners, divided by 12, multiply it times 2.5, add the EIDL loan if you need to. So nothing really changes at this point. So it's basically the same concept. You're just going to take the K1 instead of the Schedule C line 31 for self-employment. All right, so let's move on to how to calculate PPP amount for S corporations and C corporations. And right here it says you're going to compute the total payroll cost of the 941. Nothing changes. You're going to get the health insurance for all the employees. Nothing changes. In this case, you don't have to exclude the owner's health insurance because that should be in that calculation, and that would be already calculated in the owner's W-2. Then you take the state and local taxes. You're going to do the same thing, divided by 12, multiply times 2.5, and add the EIDL if you need to. One thing that I will add as a note is that specifically for S Corps and C corporations, if the owners of the business did not put themselves on payroll, they're not going to have access to PPP funds, period. This is in contrast with a Schedule C self-employed that didn't have to be in payroll in order to be eligible for PPP, or in a partnership that didn't have to be in payroll. As long as they were a general partner, they would be available for PPP money. So the owner of a C Corp or the owner of an S Corp that failed to put themselves in payroll will be excluded from PPP. So if you're an S Corp and you have 0 employees, maybe you have a couple of subcontractors, and you as the owner only took distributions and didn't do payroll for yourself, you will be excluded from the PPP. Now in this document, you're also going to see where they talk about nonprofits. I don't deal with nonprofits, so I'm just going to skip that. I'll let you go and look at that to see if any of those special rules matter to you. And they just go on and talk about more nonprofit stuff and religious organizations, which I really don't care too much about. Let's see this. I'm an LLC owner. Which instructions apply to me? So it depends on how you file your return. So if you own the LLC and you didn't elect to be an S Corp or a C Corp, and you're the only owner, it's probably going to be a Schedule C. So you need to go back and see how you filed, and it's based on how you filed, not whether or not you have an LLC. Now, what documentation are you going to provide in order to substantiate the amount? Where, as we mentioned, 941s, W-2s, W-3s, payroll reports, Schedule C, tax returns. So it's all going to be about the tax return. So if you didn't do payroll in 2019 and you didn't have your tax returns done for 2019, you're going to be screwed. Do that ASAP before the funds run out, because that's what they're asking for, right? So last thing I want to cover is the statistics by industry. So I had a friend this morning text me and say, hey, have you heard a rumor that anything under NAICS code 54 is excluded from the loans? So as far as I know, there's no specific industries that are excluded from the PPP, other than maybe illegal industries, or the ones that are illegal in some states and not illegal in other states. So I don't know if like marijuana, for example, would be eligible for PPP. Who knows? I haven't explored that. I don't know if maybe sex workers, that sort of thing, would be included in PPP. So I just don't know. But if you actually look at the statistics of who has gotten the funding from the first round, and this was released last week, you see that construction industry has gotten $44 billion, 177,000 loans approved. That's about 13% of the purse. And then we have professional, scientific, and technical services, which would include accountants. It would include engineers. They're getting 12% of the purse. So the rumor that NAICS Code 54, etc., which are basically professional, scientific, and technical, are not getting funding, those are false, right? So because look, plenty of accountants and engineers and scientists and consultants, I don't know what else falls into that category, has gotten the money. It's actually the second industry that has gotten the money. Then we got manufacturing third, and then we have healthcare fourth, and then we have what I assume is restaurants five, retail and wholesalers 6 and 7, and then you have all the other industries. So, and this is pretty consistent with what I've seen, right? I have a client that's a doctor that got like $100,000 to pay all his employees, but his office was shut down because his particular practice wasn't deemed essential. So that would fall into that second category: professional, scientific, and healthcare, or maybe, technical services, or maybe healthcare. I'm not sure which code he would fall into. I had a construction company that got multiple six-figure digits figures in a loan, like $400,000. They had like 60 or 70 employees. So I saw that. I have a couple of manufacturing clients that have gotten funding. So this is pretty consistent with what I've seen with my own client base. So anyway, I hope that this video was useful, at least to kind of dispel some of the kind of fake news and bad information that's going around. One thing that's I want to add though, if you actually look at the new interim rules, there's a specific line that says safe harbor with respect to certification concerning to the need of PPP loan request. So this is based on the backlash from all these big public companies getting funding, and I've already covered this in an earlier video, but I want to include it here too. So anybody that requests PPP are certifying that the current economic uncertainty makes a loan request necessary to support ongoing operations. And there were some additional notes by the secretary, specifically on the public companies that have access to funds. They can raise capital. They have credit with banks. They have cash in the bank. They wouldn't fall into that requirement where they actually need the money to pay their employees. So basically, they're saying that if you apply for the PPP and you want to give the money back, and you give the money back, you will fall into the required certification in good faith. So technically, you won't have repercussions from the federal government. So what that means is that I think most public companies, or most companies that have the money, that don't need this PPP money, will give the money back. And I actually have had a couple of clients call me and say, you know what, I don't want to go through with it. I don't want to finish the loan process. I'll take out a loan with my bank, or I have a line of credit, or I think that I have enough income coming in where I can pay my employees. I'm going to go ahead and not take the PPP money. So this is a pretty interesting turn of events where, we had to wait until round 2 for this to happen, for them to add this additional mini threat there, right? So the people that were asking for money at least have a little bit of conscience, or maybe they're scared of potentially having to deal with the federal government and prove to them that you actually needed the money. It's a tough thing because with today's economy, it's really hard to really know what's going to happen tomorrow. So anyway, I hope this was useful to you. And coming Monday, the 27th, I hope SBA approves some more of those PPP loans. And as I mentioned on my spreadsheet, look, 50%, effectively 50% of the workforce will get the funding, at least based on these calculations, will get the funding. So I hope they don't do a round 3 of PPP. This is more than enough, right? The federal government effectively subsidized half of the employees of the U.S. for 2 months, for 8 weeks, and which is approximately 95 to 100% of small businesses in the country. So this will achieve the intent. This will achieve the needs of the country, right? So there you go. Hope there's no more funding. This is good enough. I don't want any more of my tax dollars going to programs that are at least $19 billion is going to banks, so I don't want any more. And I suspect and I hope that this will be sufficient. And I also suspect and I hope that COVID-19 will become last year's news pretty soon. So we'll see where it goes. I hope this was useful. See you in the next one.